Okay, everyone can see the PowerPoint? Okay, great, thank you. All right, so let's start with something kind of simple, which is the two major components of stress. We have a stressor, also known as a stimulus, and we have a stress response, which is our response and engagement to a stimulus. So stress is actually a broad category, which has two major components, a stimulus and the response. Yeah. So when we're looking at something called buffering, we might put a buffer between stimulus and response. That's a buffering. And we also might put buffering within our own response system to give us more space and room. Yeah. So we're actually going to do a little bit of each today. Yeah. In fact, the first one we did was exactly that, that buffer between stimulus and response, or buffer between us and something, an external stressor. Yeah. Okay. So let's get into a little bit of the anatomy and physiology, shall we? So for some of us, this might be pretty familiar, and to which you get a refresher. Congratulations. Um, and we'll get more detailed as we go along. So I want to do a little organizational overview of the nervous system. So the nervous system has two main parts. We have the central nervous system and we have the peripheral nervous system. And because the nervous system and endocrine system and basically every other system is involved in a stress response, we want to understand the different components that help create that stress response. And the first part we'll look at is the nervous system. So in the nervous system, we have two main, call it wings. We have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. And we have the peripheral nervous system, which is comprised of two smaller wings, which is the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system has two more little wings called that's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, most of us have probably heard that our stress responses or stress is just around here, the autonomic nervous system in terms of sympathetic and parasympathetic. Is that true? Feel familiar? Well, not so true. It is true, but it's not the bigger picture. Every single component that's on this map right here is involved in a stress response. Yeah. Because most of our body is involved in a stress response to make sure it happens. So yes, the autonomic nervous system helps create that sort of readiness to respond along with aspects of the brain. And the somatic nervous system helps us actualize it to respond. Okay, so next slide. I'm saying that just so in case it freezes. Okay, so here we have the stress response. We're talking about the activation, which is, has anyone felt like short of breath or a little bit of tightening in response to when they're stressed? Never. That's actually just called a phase of stress response called activation. And that's getting us ready to respond and engage. Yeah. Now, there's always the question of how much response do I need to actually engage with this? But before we go into that big question, it's how does the response, the readiness to respond happen in my body? Okay. And that's where we'll be diving into today in terms of stress buffering. So at the top here, we have stressor, which is a stimuli. Yeah, that's all it means, essentially. It's a kind of less dramatic than we might hope, but stressor just means the stimulus. And it comes into, I'm shortening this part. So for those who are like super into the neuroanatomy, I am simplifying it just a wee bit. So the stimulus comes in through our sense organs, right? That's why we were doing a little bit of orienting earlier. Oh, like, can I connect to the way I'm seen in the world? Can I connect to how I'm bringing in and attending to sound and texture and smell and taste? Because all of the things, what we call a stressor, is coming in through those portals. Yeah. So our extra, these portals of sensory information come in through these sense organs, and they relay into the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is taking all that sensory information, and the hypothalamus is not just responsible, but is in part responsible for our biological cycles. So like our circadian rhythm, our temperature, our appetite, physiological and emotional responses to stimuli, and produces a hormone that helps create the responsiveness to stimuli, known as an activation. Are we clear so far? Cool. So stressor comes in through the sensory portals into the hypothalamus, which is in the middle of your brain. And then it starts to create a cascade of response so that we can become more responsive or ready to respond. Yeah. So there's two main tracks that we'll be looking at. On the left side is the nervous system track, and the right side is the endocrine system track. So the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then has its own sort of production and creates a ACTH, which is released and which stimulates the adrenal cortex. So the adrenal cortex is a little gland sitting on your kidneys, which are right behind you in your lower back. Yeah. So anything that says adrenal in here is related to the kidney. It's like a little top hat that sits on the kidney. Yeah. The cortexes. And so that secretes, and then the adrenal glands, which again are on your kidneys, or one kidney, typically both, will produce several glucocorticoids or hormones, for example, cortisol. And we'll get into cortisol in a few minutes. We'll get down and dirty with cortisol. And so then cortisol, the secretion from the adrenal cortex will also help stimulate other glands and organs to produce, in total, over 30 stress hormones to engage with other organs and glands and etc. Yeah. On the sympathetic nervous system side, we have this sort of chain response in the sympathetic nervous system that will stimulate the adrenal medulla, so another area of the kidney, which secretes another hormone or other hormones like epinephrine, which again, we'll get into more detail about cortisol and epinephrine in just a few minutes. The sympathetic nervous system will innervate through nerve endings various muscles and glands to be responsive. Yeah. So all of this party is happening to create what's called an arousal activation, which is the readiness, the energy readiness to respond to the stimuli. Is that clear so far? And we're going to be focusing on some of the hormones in response or in relationship to stress buffering. So I just want to give us a general map of why those hormones are coming and for what reason, which is to help create this arousal response or the readiness in our body to engage. Is that clear so far? You got a thumbs up? Cool. Because I say, is that clear, and thumbs up, because this can be a kind of a radically different concept of stress than we might be used to. That it's like, whoa, there's all of these hormones and stuff that's happening. It's just helping me get ready to go do things. Oh, that's not so doomsday-y. Yeah. And kind of how stress is typically talked about or written about is pretty doomsday-y. Yeah. It's like the thing that's coming to get us and destroy us, which is just not the entire picture. Yeah. So let's get a little down dirty with some of the stress hormones that we're talking about. Okay. So I'm just going to minimize that. All right. Can I just get a thumbs up that the screen is on for you? It says stress release hormones or stress response hormones. Groovy. Okay. So the three that we're going to, or three that we're going to be really looking at in terms of stress buffering, because these, while there are, as I mentioned, over 30 different hormones that all go in and are have certain roles in creating that full arousal response. Kind of the more well-known, famous ones are cortisol and epinephrine or adrenaline. Yeah, is that fair to say? Those have like they each have their own T-shirt where the other ones don't. They're just not as popular for whatever reason. So cortisol and epinephrine. So I'm going to read this and then we'll talk about it. And, I just want to say cortisol typically gets, and adrenaline gets super bad reputations. Yeah, they're, like when we think of cortisol, it's usually followed with sort of a negative bias or attitude towards it. And cortisol is pretty darn awesome and is essential for immune system functioning and reduction of inflammation. Again, that sometimes can be surprising for some of us who are so used to sort of the attitude or projection of what cortisol is. So cortisol helps increase glucose in the body, which is the energy we need to take action. It improves glucose absorption in the brain, also important to take action. It increases immune system function. As I mentioned, it's responsible for repairing tissues. It's vital for protein and carbohydrate metabolism. And cortisol helps decrease other body functions so that energy can be diverted towards responding to the external stimuli. Yeah? So cortisol is helpful in being like, oh, we don't need this function as much right now. So let's divert that energy to engage, which is great. Like, I don't need to be sleeping right now when I'm watching a thrilling movie. I need to be engaging. Yeah. So I won't have that energy expenditure that's working towards sleeping at the same time. Now, clearly, when there's a constant cascade, when like the faucet of cortisol, we're talking about cortisol here as being in regulation. Like it's not dysregulated, it's regulated. So it's like the faucet's on, I fill up my cup, I drink my water, and it goes off. Yeah, it's needed when it's needed. And utilized when it's needed. When it becomes a challenge is when I forget to turn off the faucet and it floods my whole kitchen. Yeah. But we can't judge a hormone by the time we forgot to turn off the faucet. Because our life is not just that. Yeah. We also have plenty of moments where thankfully the faucet came on, we drank some water, and we turned it off. Okay. Epinephrine and adrenaline. So an adrenal stress hormone that helps regulate the stress response. It helps us with focus, energy, and alertness, and effort. This is an important one. Both cortisol and epinephrine are really significant. It gives us the boost to effort into things, the energy to expend to take action. Again, typically, like when we think of adrenaline, we're like, oh, it's what helps me jump off a bridge and bungee jump, and I get this big adrenaline rush. Well, yeah, but it also, on like a day-to-day level, helps with your attentiveness, your focus, to tune into the stimuli and what you're working on. Like if I'm writing an email, that epinephrine actually is what gives me the effort, the energy of effort to effort it. Yeah. It also helps increase heart rate, muscle strength, blood pressure, and sugar metabolism. And norepinephrine is just the version of epinephrine or adrenaline, and it's created in the brain as opposed to in the rest of the body, which makes it actually a neurotransmitter as opposed to just a regular hormone. But we'll get into neurotransmitters now. Yeah. So again, what's important, what we want to take from right now and what we'll apply to the rest of the session is that cortisol and epinephrine are intended to help us effort, to gives us that energy to effort through things. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about like what happens when we're over efforted or when it doesn't turn off in a moment. Yeah. Okay. So neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are hormones that get essentially created in the brain. That's the neuro part of it. And these are the fun little visual picture image of serotonin and dopamine. So neurotransmitters they boost and they balance signals between neurons. Yeah. So I'll say that again. They carry, they boost, and they balance the signals between one nerve and the next. So nerves are not like, I don't just have one nerve and it goes around to my whole body. We have neurons or nerves, and they have a gap space between them called a synapse. It's a gap space. And the neurotransmitters are what, from a little sac from the end of that nerve, is what gets released to help, again, balance or carry or boost that signal that's coming through that nerve into the next one as part of this communication. Yeah. So that's what a neurotransmitter does. And they help target cells. And there's, in your body at any one time, there's billions or trillions of neurotransmitter molecules that are running through to help make all of this happen with basic biological functions, breathing, sleeping, concentrating, focusing. And there are many different types of neurotransmitters depending on what's being communicated and the sort of goal of what needs to be communicated and actioned. Yeah. So we have 6 major categories of neurotransmitters. We have amino acids, we have peptides, we have monoamines. So we're looking at monoamines today, which is including norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. Yeah, so that's in the classification of monoamines. We have purines, P-U-R-I-N-E-S, purines. We have gastro neurotransmitters, or gastrotransmitters rather. And then we have acetylcholine is the 6th one. So those are the bigger categories, and there's neurotransmitters within each of those categories, but they all serve kind of different functions or different objectives, we could say. Okay, So what's important here is that dopamine and serotonin, I'm sorry, I'll read about dopamine and serotonin. So the thing about neurotransmitters is like stress, it can be overgeneralized. Yeah. So it can be like dopamine is about rewards. Yes, but it does a lot more than just that. One neurotransmitter does not do one single thing. So we can't just say this is our reward hormone or this is our happy hormone. Unfortunately, that's just not the way that it's just so much more nuanced and complex than that. But they do focus more on particular things, but they often have they're multitaskers, each neurotransmitter. Yeah. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter involved in perception, attention, reward, addiction, behavioral reinforcement. Instead of addiction, I usually say behavioral reinforcement. And coordination of body movement. Who would have thought? Dopamine is also about motivation and drive. Yeah. So commonly thought of as the reward process, dopamine is more about the motivation and the pursuit of reward. So when when we get a flood of dopamine, it's not at when we've reached our goal, it's actually in the motivation and in the journey of getting there. So if we're so goal-oriented, and we'll look at this today, about the end result, we will actually have less of a dopamine response because we're not attending to the journey of it. And remember, dopamine is also going to give us the boost or the buffering to help keep us motivated and moving along to reach that goal. That says, hey, this behavior of getting to that goal should be reinforced, and we want to keep motivating you so we can get to that goal. Yeah. Otherwise, we just have this flood of effort hormones. Yeah. The adrenaline and cortisol, and we effort and we effort and we effort and we effort and we burn out. So dopamine and serotonin are going to give us this capacity and the sense of motivation to keep going even when things are tiring or hard. So we don't effort ourselves out of actualization. Yeah. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter involved in regulating mood, sleep, appetite, sex. I don't know why I said it like that, but it's fun. And it's also about rewards. So and derived from more of a relaxed state, typically. Yeah. So typically when we get to feel there's a serotonin boost that goes, oh, that was a good thing we just did. Let's reinforce that too, because it gave us the, yeah. So dopamine and serotonin, again, allow us to effort longer and enjoy the process of that effort. That's really important. That's what allows us to reach goals, is the boost to keep doing it and the enjoyment of it. And it gives us the space to allow us to actually find more meaning in what we're doing. It's that buffering that not only allows us to effort longer and enjoy the process, but also derive meaning from it. And meaning making is one of the main pillars of well-being. When we're learning from something, when we're growing from something, when our process or the journey holds significance. Okay. How are we doing so far with the neurochemistry? I tried to make it not too intense. All right. And that's the piece on the neurochemistry that we'll look at today is, okay, we have these efforting hormones, which are cortisol and adrenaline. It's like, let's do this. Let's make shit happen. Yeah. And then we have these neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin, that we're going to help stimulate to create more buffering, so we can effort longer, we can enjoy it, and derive meaning from it. Okay? So we're going to do some practices that essentially help us stimulate a little dopamine serotonin party. Okay? Who doesn't like that? Okay, so here's where you're going to draw. I would like you to draw a ladder. Yeah, so it can have, let's see, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 steps to it, a step ladder. And this is a practice I've used with clients a lot to help buffer stress, to buffer overwhelm, as we talked about before, and for them to be able to proceed with their goals and start to receive the experience, the learning, the felt sense of their own developmental journey to that goal. That will make more sense once we dive in. But all right, has everyone drawn? That's the word. Drawn their ladder. Okay, cool. So here is what we're going to do. Is the first one is called a strategic ladder. I don't know why I named it that. It just did. So we'll do 2 different type of ladder practices. This is one a ladder practice I did with a client yesterday, actually. So there was this goal and a lot of efforting to this young gentleman who wants to live on his own and have his own apartment, which is fine. It's great. But the sort of like, that was the main attention. Yeah, it became sort of tunnel visioned into that and just didn't know how to action. It was so much effort to get to the idea of like, got to get this, got to get my own apartment, got to move out of with my parents, like got to do all this stuff, that he was burning out from it. Yeah. So there was all this energy to do it, but not the ability to figure out the steps or the journey, which is what will allow more buffering for him to attend to all of that and actualize his goal. So what we did was, on the top of the ladder, and you all are going to make your own ladder in a minute. On the top of that ladder was his main goal. Yeah, I'm going to live on my own in my own apartment. And so, it's not so linear. We were kind of working up and down at the same time, figuring out the steps. So we knew to look for an apartment, he has to have money. Yeah, so we knew that. So to have money, he has to get a job. So that's where we actually started, was the bottom. But he didn't know we'd been doing this over weeks, by the way. Is picking apart these pieces, and then yesterday we put it together. So, he needed a job in order to eventually get his own apartment, but he couldn't even identify, like, what is he like? What things is he passionate about? Yeah. So that's where we had to start. That was the bottom base of the ladder, is let's work through, get an idea of what I want to do with my time. Like, what inspires me? What are my passions? So that was the base of it. Okay, then we identified something. Oh, I like the idea of like flipping houses. I saw a TV show about it, and that excites me. Great, we're taking that excitation energy and looking at the next step, which is I look for a venture or project I can align with. So he's like, okay, eventually found a house that he is interested in working with and flipping. Yeah. Then we were looking at, okay, what's the next steps? Okay, I'm purchasing a house. I have to redesign it, and then I have to hire contractors. Then I sell the house and say, put X amount of money from that sale into a savings account, which is about 9 months of living on his own. I'm going a little bit quicker now. Okay. And then the next step would be look for an apartment, identify what he needs and what's possible based on his budget, and then he moves in to his own apartment. So we broke down the goal into steps because there was, again, so much efforting around this idea without recognizing what he's already accomplished and where he needs to go next. So we broke it from like this massive, overwhelming goal into a journey. Because it's the journey and the presencing of ourself in that journey, which allows more of the production of dopamine, which is a buffer for the amount of cortisol and adrenaline that's pumping out to try to make something happen. We clear on that so far? Cool. So I'm gonna give you a couple minutes to create your own ladder. You might not finish, and that's fine. We'll just take a couple minutes about starting to unpack a journey. It might be one you've already done, and it might be one that you're in the middle of. So this particular person I was talking about is on the third step of the ladder. He has not completed this ladder. But what it's done is given him a sense of where he's come from and what he's accomplished and where he's going next on his journey. Yeah. So take a few moments to make a 5 or 6 step ladder. It can be something you've already gone through in your life, a journey you've gone through, one you are in the middle of, or one you will be going through. By journey, I mean like a goal and a journey to that actualization of that goal. Now, I want to just name this particular ladder is called strategic. We have another ladder later that's called organic. Strategic means that we're able to really identify each step. Now, sometimes in life, we're not able to know what the next steps are. And that's also okay, but that's what we call an organic ladder. And I'll explain that later. This one is the strategic one where we are identifying kind of the major milestones on this journey. Places we get to check in with and feel the experience of accomplishment and recognition of where we are. Let's take another minute. Even if you don't finish it, it's fine because it's just so you got to start and you'll finish it later. This was a 5-hour day. We'd spend more time giving you to do it. Now we're gonna kind of tune back into the screen, and I just want to say, for some of us, the pillow practice, which is very kinesthetic and experiential, is easier for us than having to like identify what seemingly is more cognitive approach to the steps. So I just want to name that. One practice doesn't suit all, but it is a quite helpful practice even for those of us who are more kinesthetically based or movement based to try this out. So so as I mentioned, my client who I was working with had not completed this ladder. We spent time really taking in the body felt sense of having completed the first one and completed the second step on the ladder. This is important. This is where we get that dopamine and some serotonin response, that buffer, the neurotransmitter that help with the buffering, is when we soak in, we really dive into the experience and the recognition of what we've been already able to achieve along this journey. It helps us give us some foundation and some build up to keep going forward. Yeah. I mean, to use the familiar terms, like, we stop and we smell the roses, but we actually get a lot out of stopping and smelling the roses. We get the support to continue onward. So he was at this step of purchasing the house, redesigning, hiring a contractor. So at this stage, because he's not completed it, we go to the next little section, which is on needs. So I said, okay, we spent time really soaking in the experience of his accomplishments of stepping up the ladder, giving some sense of progression. There was a study that was done of people who are running on treadmills, and it was a VR study, and the people who in their screens just saw something static or didn't have really anything and they were running were not able to run as far or as fast or as effective as those who were able. On the VR screen, it showed like a screen that was moving. It gave them a sense that they were progressing. Yeah, that sense of progression is really important to be able to move forward to achieve our goals. So that's what we're getting on that step ladder of like, oh, we've already accomplished this milestone. We've got this milestone. Oh, and here we are on this step of the ladder. And how are you feeling? And what do you need in this moment? So we don't get carried away by focusing on what's next. We attend to what's happening in the present moment so we can support ourselves or get supported to then be able to actualize into the next step. Yeah. So we check in. How are you feeling about this? What do you need? I need some joy right now. Cool. I need some sense of security. I need connection. I need closeness. Great. How can you get that to support this where you are in relationship on this journey. Is that clear so far? So it's not just about what we've achieved, it's also meeting us where we are with our feelings and our needs to help us continue to progress. All of those things are buffering to the overwhelm of the effort, or overwhelm of the effort that is also from the cortisol and adrenaline. Yeah. Cool. So here, as I mentioned, we have organic ladder practices, which is like, I have no idea what's coming next. I can't even, oh, I can't go there. And I had a client years ago who I created this ladder practice with, actually, and her goal in coming to see me was to get a divorce. And it took her about a year to tell me that. And we spent a couple weeks celebrating that. Not that it took a year, but that she was able to do it in a year. We really soaked in and really celebrated, wow, what that must have been like. You had to build up so much trust and connection and strength within yourself and the capacities to express, to be able to share that. That's a real significant step on the ladder. Yeah. I don't know what comes next. I mean, I could tell her, oh, the next thing is you get to hire a lawyer. But that's me imposing what would be next. And she also couldn't identify what came next. We had to do it organically in the moment. So the next thing that ended up happening was that she worked through what she called her issues of codependency. That without someone, I will be okay. I had no idea. She had no idea that was the next step. But every time I checked in, I was like, oh, is this a step on the ladder? She was like, it is a step on the ladder. And so it was being done really organically in the moment. We had no idea how long that ladder was. Didn't matter. We had no idea how many steps it would be, but we celebrated each time in the organic moment the felt sense of like, oh, I'm able to move that much more forward. Because her tendency was to also not recognize or acknowledge the progress she was making. And that was what would cause the inability to actualize the goal. It would just be like some version of efforting and overwhelm without the sort of support of the buffering. So in the celebration of it, in each moment, in the checking in, it's being like, oh, is this a step on the ladder? It created what was needed in order to eventually actualize her goal, which it did. It took 4 years. Now, 4 years of us working and 30 some years before that, trying to get to it before that, it doesn't matter. Like that time it's not something we judge. Because especially in the organic ladder, it's about the stages of development. By the time she got to her goal, it really had to do with this huge evolution of herself that was so much bigger than the goal of just divorcing her husband. The total transformation she experienced was nothing. Was so much more significant than the original goal. Because she really worked through all of these pieces that was getting in the way between her and her goal. And that was the journey of evolution. So that's really what we call an organic ladder practice in that way. It's identifying the milestones from a felt sense and recording them without knowing per se where the next one is. Both the strategic and the organic ladders are supportive in different places. And for different people even. But they do the same thing, which is they create this buffering so that the effort doesn't overwhelm us, but helps fuel us into actualization of our goals. And the last piece we'll talk about with that is just so another practice that's really, and we've already talked about it a little bit, but one of the practices in the studies for serotonin that are really significant for the production and release of serotonin is meditation um, and gratitude practices. So, how I create or integrate gratitude practices is very simple. I don't go through, I mean, there's lots of different great gratitude practices from a lot of different practitioners, but the way that I do it in relationship to these latter practices is simply a reflection. Oh, I did that. I was able to get even just a little bit more up on the step. And these are the things that I brought in to help me, or these are the strategies I came up with, whatever it is. I'm reflecting on it. Then we call it marinating in the good. It's like taking a bath in that. It's not just a visualization anymore of what I've accomplished or what I've done or the people or the resources that have helped me. I am literally soaking in it, soaking in the experience, the bath of that process, that journey. And then I'm soaking it in, I'm absorbing it, I'm letting it change me. I'm really letting it have a neurochemical response because I'm soaking it in. It's like, if you think of all the, and I soak it in, it's like creating all those molecules of dopamine and serotonin, as opposed to when I'm sitting in a bath, I'm just sitting in a bath, which is I get to feel the texture, the warmth, the sense, the sensory information. But the absorbing is allowing it to actually enter, filter in, and become part of my experience. Yeah. I'm absorbing what it is that's already been accomplished. I'm in that pausing, the absorbing, smelling the flowers, taking it in. We're getting that neurotransmitter support, that building of capacity to allow us to keep efforting with support. And that's what we call stress buffering. Yeah. To be able to engage and be in relationship to something, even when it doesn't feel pleasant per se, but to be able to do it with support and capacity. And just to, for us to find a place to pause, we often don't achieve what we can't buffer. Yeah. When we don't take that time to pause, to reflect, to celebrate, to absorb, to recognize, oh, I just stepped up on this ladder that, when I look up, I might lose sight of all the steps that I've created that I'm able to stand up on. So how do I feel the ground to which I have built and continue to build that allows me to transcend or move up to my goals with support, that support? Yeah. Cool. So there we have it. A little stress buffering for all of us to play with. So let's take this last minute just to sit, kind of take a bath in whatever we were swimming in the last hour and a half. Yeah, you can grab your pillow. That's a delightful idea. We'll just sit together in a sort of bath of words and ideas and experiences and processes from this last 90 minutes. Whatever wants to be soaked in or remembered. And take even another 30 seconds more together, soaking in, absorbing, connecting with whatever wants to be remembered. And then from there, coming back out, if you wish, you can also just hang out here for the next couple of minutes as we say our goodbyes. Or if it feels right to come back out to the space, to our friends who have joined us around the world. We just say our hellos and our goodbyes again. Thank you all so much for joining in this masterclass session on the Embody Lab. And we look forward to hanging out with you in a bunch more of them. And stay connected. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your stress buffering day. And, and we will all talk and see each other soon, I hope. Bye.